The parking lot at Haneul Grace Medical Center never truly slept. It only slowed down. On the top floor, where the concrete was colder and the wind entered freely between the columns, an old sedan had been parked for days. Always in the same corner, always far from the main cameras. Inside it, Ethan Cole slept poorly. The reclining seat wouldn't close completely. The roof creaked when the wind hit harder. The smell was a mixture of cheap coffee, old rain, and antiseptic that never left his clothes. He woke before dawn, not out of habit, out of vigilance. He knew exactly when the security guards changed shifts, when the back elevator made less noise, when the hospital entered that heavy silence of 4 in the morning, the interval when life seemed suspended. Ethan didn't draw attention. He never did. A dark-haired man, body too tired to seem young, gaze too attentive to seem distracted. He always wore the same clean but worn clothes, didn't ask for help, didn't complain, didn't explain anything to anyone. He came from Riverton, a town too small to save his sister, Lila Cole, 19 years old, fragile heart since childhood. The only place with adequate treatment was there in Silver Heights, at the city's most expensive hospital. The money wasn't enough for everything, so he chose the essentials: tests, medications, fees. The rest, comfort, visible dignity. Rest became luxury. The parking lot became home. The hospital, the world. During the day, Ethan remained invisible. At night, he became part of the structure. He knew which doors creaked, which hallways never turned off the lights, which coffee machine changed the grounds at 2 in the morning. He knew when the early morning weighed heavy, and that night it weighed heavier. The rain started fine, almost polite. Then it thickened, hitting the concrete with irregular force. The hospital basement was almost empty when Seo-Jin crossed the space alone. She shouldn't have been alone. She never was CEO of the hospital group, billionaire, heiress to a medical empire built on efficiency and control. But that meeting had run too long. The driver was waiting at another entrance, and she decided to take a shortcut. Firm shoes, straight posture, quick steps. The sound changed before she noticed. A wrong echo, a movement between cars. The man appeared too fast, too close. Her body reacted late, and then something broke in the space between them. Ethan appeared not as a hero, but as instinct. He knew that basement better than any architectural plan. He saw the angle, the reflection in the glass, the error in the stranger's step. He placed himself between them without thinking. The confrontation was short, brutal, confused. A push against the car, a fist that found bone, a muffled grunt. The attacker retreated and ran. The silence returned violently. Seo-Jin stood motionless, hands trembling slightly. Ethan breathed heavily, his fists throbbing. "Are you okay?" he asked. First, the question hit her harder than the scare, because nobody asked her that, ever. She took time to respond, not out of fear, out of strangeness. "I am." He nodded, as if that was enough. He was already walking away when she called him. "Do you work here?" He looked around, at the concrete, at the low ceiling. No, nothing more. He disappeared between the cars before she could say anything else. In the following days, his face didn't leave her mind. Not the fear, not the attack. The detail, the way he knew the space, how he moved without hesitation, how he asked about her before thinking of himself. Seo-Jin requested reports, images, names. She found nothing, until she started seeing him. In the 4th-floor hallway, in the cardiology waiting room, sitting in silence at 5 in the morning, looking at the floor like someone who didn't want to take up space, always there, always nearby. And something in her, something that never slowed down, began to notice. Something about that invisible man was about to dismantle the entire system she had built without seeing who remained on the outside. The hospital doesn't perceive subtle changes. People do. And Seo-Jin began to perceive. She passed through the cardiology hallway on a Tuesday, too ordinary to justify the unease she felt. Meeting in 10 minutes. $1 million decision on the agenda. The phone vibrating in her coat pocket. And then she saw Ethan, sitting in the same chair as always, back against the wall, hands clasped, gaze lowered, attentive at the same time, like someone who hears everything but speaks little. He didn't look at her, and yet something made her slow down. She moved forward, 2 steps, 3. She stopped. She didn't know why. She went back 1 step, then another. "Good morning," she said, as if those words cost nothing. Ethan raised his gaze slowly. He didn't seem surprised, just present. "Good morning." The voice was low, controlled, without expectation. She expected something more. It didn't come. Comfortable silence. Strange. She nodded, as if ending an invisible conversation, and continued. But that morning was different. Less noise inside her head. Less nameless urgency. The next day they bumped into each other again, this time at the ground floor coffee machine, the only one that still accepted coins. He held a paper cup. She observed the broken display. "It swallows coins," he said, almost casual, "if you put in 2 at once." She smiled without noticing. "Thank you, you're welcome." He moved away before she could say more. And that stayed. The encounters began to repeat. Never planned, never forced. A brief nod. A whispered hi. Sometimes just the presence. Seo-Jin began to measure the day by this, not out of dependence, out of contrast. The hospital was a place of hard decisions, of constant rush, of faces that asked something from her all the time. There, nobody asked anything. Ethan didn't ask. He was always there because he needed to be, not because he expected something in return. She began to notice the details, the way he held his backpack close to his chest, how he avoided occupying more than 1 chair, how he always arrived early and left late, and she began to wonder why. The answer came without announcement. A fragmented conversation between 2 nurses, a medical record forgotten on the counter, a surname repeated. Seo-Jin stopped. Read carefully. Reread. Cardiology. Extended hospitalization. City of origin. Riverton. The floor seemed to tilt slightly. She found Ethan that same night sitting in the same place. The hospital quieter than normal. "Your sister," she began, not knowing exactly how. "She is the patient in 412. He took time to respond, not because he didn't want to, because he was choosing. Yes, there was no shame, but there was an immediate closure. "She's improving," Seo-Jin said. "The protocol is working. I know. You sleep here. It wasn't a question." Ethan breathed deeply, didn't look away. Yes, she felt the weight of that, not as CEO, as a person. "I can help." He raised his hand calmly, not rude, not aggressive. "She's not a favor." The words were low, firm, definitive. That hit her harder than any public criticism. She nodded slowly. "I understand," and she left without insisting. But that night nothing in her could ignore what she had just seen. 2 days later, Seo-Jin did something she never did. She went back without correcting. She found Ethan in the parking lot near the old sedan. The rain threatened to fall again. "I didn't come to offer money," she said right away, "nor influence." He observed her in silence. "I came to offer shelter." He frowned. "While your sister is in treatment," she continued. "Sleeping in the car isn't care." Silence. She didn't insist, didn't explain, didn't justify. "Think about it." She turned and left. That night it rained harder than normal. Ethan sat inside the car, listening. To the water hit the roof. He thought about Lila. He thought about the hospital. He thought about the pride that had always kept him standing. He thought about the tiredness. And he accepted. Seo-Jin's house was too big to seem comfortable, too silent to seem alive. Ethan didn't invade, didn't occupy, but little by little he filled it. They cooked together without rush. They talked at night without invasive questions. They laughed quietly, as if they didn't want to wake the world. The touch came slowly, a gaze that lingered too long, a hand that found another by chance. And when Lila began to improve, something changed, because the romance was no longer subtle. It was necessity. And Seo-Jin realized, too late, that that invisible man had become the point of peace in her routine. Maybe you felt this too, that one person who appears in the middle of chaos, and without trying becomes the only safe place in your day. If you've ever had someone like that, tell me in the comments. Let me know where you're watching this story from. And if this quiet connection already touched something in you, subscribe, because this story is about to test your emotions. The hospital functioned like a precise mechanism, but mechanisms creak when something deviates from the pattern, and Ethan began to deviate from the pattern, not because he changed, but because he started being seen. The security guards noticed first. A man who used to sleep on the top floor of the parking lot now arrived, by car with a driver. He entered through the back. He walked through the hallways with the same discreet posture, but not invisible. Some gazes lingered longer than normal. Others distrusted. Who is he? New consultant. Someone's relative. Nobody knew, and that bothered them. In the cardiology wing, Lila improved visibly. Color returned to her face. Laughter appeared more frequently. Breathing no longer seemed like a struggle. Ethan spent more time sitting beside the bed than walking. Through the hallways, he held her hand when the machines beeped. He told stories from Riverton. He invented endings better than the ones he knew, as Seo-Jin observed from afar. She didn't invade that space, didn't interfere. But something in her changed every time she saw the way he cared. There was no heroism. There was constancy, and that disarmed her. With time, the encounters stopped being accidental. She began to look for him, not with anxiety, with silent necessity. She found Ethan on the hospital terrace where almost nobody went. There the city noise arrived muffled. The wind carried the smell of rain and concrete. "Do you always come up here?" she asked once. "When I need to think, does it work?" He thought before responding. "It doesn't solve, but it organizes." She smiled slightly. "I should come more often. Maybe." He didn't suggest, didn't invite, but he left space. One of those nights Seo-Jin stayed longer than she intended. She spoke about decisions that weighed heavy, people who expected quick answers to problems that weren't simple. Ethan listened, as always. "You never try to fix," she commented. "I wasn't invited, and if you were..." He looked at her for the first time with something beyond calm. "I'd ask first if you want a solution or silence." She breathed deeply. "Silence." He nodded, and they stayed there. Without touching. Without promises. But something had already crossed an invisible line. The incident came without warning, an internal audit, an anonymous complaint, improper use of resources, unauthorized presence in private facilities, risk to institutional image. Seo-Jin read the reports with professional coldness, but inside something hardened. Ethan was summoned by administrative security, not with violence, with excessive formality. "We need you to leave the hospital premises outside visiting hours." He didn't argue, didn't explain. Of course, but when he left he carried something. Different in his gaze, controlled humiliation. Seo-Jin knew before being officially informed. She called the directors, demanded names. "This isn't about protocol," she said, voice too firm to be ignored. "It's about fear. And fear doesn't manage this hospital." The silence that followed was dense, but the damage had already been done. That night, Ethan didn't go up to the terrace, didn't appear in the hallway, didn't respond to the short messages that Seo-Jin never thought she'd send. She found him in the parking lot, alone. Again, the old car was there, not because he needed it, but because someone had decided to remind him where he belonged. "You didn't need to come," he said without harshness. "I needed to." He leaned against the car, crossed his arms. "This will become a problem for you. It already has." He laughed quietly, without humor. "They don't see me the way you do. They don't need to," she replied. "I do." The silence between them changed texture. "I don't want to be an exception," he said. "I don't want to be the reason for concessions." You're not, Seo-Jin replied. You're the reason for change. He shook his head. That has a price, I know. She took a step closer. Didn't touch. And you? Are you willing to pay it with me? He raised his gaze. For the first time there was fear there. Not of the system, but of what he felt. I'm already paying, he said. The next day, Seo-Jin did something irreversible. She changed. Protocols, signed authorizations, restructured rules that nobody had ever questioned. She didn't cite Ethan, didn't expose him, but she made it clear nobody would be treated as disposable inside that hospital again. The system began to react, and that made everything more dangerous. The hospital doesn't forget. It just waits. After the changes signed by Seo-Jin, the Haneul Grace Medical Center continued functioning, but different, more rigid, more attentive, and for some, more dangerous. The directors obeyed, the shareholders observed, and those who had always profited from silence began to move. Ethan felt it first, not in words, but in absence. Invitations that didn't come, gazes that passed through, security guards who now knew his name and pronounced it too slowly. He remained discreet, remained dignified, but he was no longer invisible. Lila noticed everything. You're different, she said one afternoon, sitting on the bed, the sun entering through the room's window. Tired, just attentive. She smiled weakly. She's good for you. He didn't respond, not because he disagreed, but because saying it out loud would make it too real. Carol appeared almost every day, not as CEO, as presence. She sat in the hard armchair in the room, asked about tests, about pain, about simple plans, those that didn't appear in reports. When Lila slept, the silence between them grew, and so did the desire. The first touch wasn't planned. It was a reflex. In an empty hallway, too late for doctors, too early for the next day, Carol stumbled slightly in her heel. Ethan held her arm, nothing more. But time slowed down. She felt the warmth of his hand. He felt her breathing change. They didn't pull away immediately. This, she began. No, he replied quietly. If you say it, it won't come back. She swallowed hard. Then stay. He released her arm slowly. That's the problem. They didn't kiss that night, but they also didn't pretend nothing had happened. The tension became constant, the silence heavy. And the more Carol tried to act only as CEO, the more she realized how much Ethan was no longer just a detail of the routine. He was reference. The warning came disguised as a meeting. One of the oldest counselors, elegant man, voice too soft, closed the office door. You're confusing leadership with personal involvement. Carol maintained her posture. I'm correcting distortions. With a man who slept in the parking lot. The phrase fell like a blade. Be careful, he continued. The system accepts reforms, not intimacies. She held his gaze. The system exists to serve people, not to crush them. He smiled. The right people. There, Carol understood. It wasn't just about Ethan. It was about what he represented. That night, Ethan decided to leave. Lila already had a discharge date. Riverton was waiting for them. It was safer, simpler. Carol found the suitcase in his car trunk. You're going to disappear. Before they do it for me, I can prevent it. You shouldn't. He breathed deeply. I don't want to be the weakness they use against you. She felt the ground disappear. And I don't want to be the reason you become invisible again. Silence, the kind that hurts. They kissed there. Not with haste, not with urgency, with awareness. A kiss that didn't promise ease, but assumed choice. This changes everything, he said, forehead against hers. I know. You're going to lose things I already lost, she replied. Before I met you. He smiled sadly. Then we lose together. The next day the attack came. Not physical, structural. An external investigation. Stocks falling. Subtle headlines. And at the center of everything, a name that shouldn't be there. Ethan Cole. The system decided to react, and now there was no turning back. Not everyone would make this choice. To lose status, to lose power, just to not lose their humanity. Now I want to know about you. If you were in her place, would you have the courage to pay that price? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story made you feel something real, like, subscribe and share. Because on this channel, the stories aren't about who controls, they're about who chooses to see. The attack didn't come as scandal. It came as organized silence. Reports leaked without signature. Preventive audits. Emergency meetings scheduled without Carol Seo-Jin's name on the agenda, something unthinkable weeks before. The Haneul Grace Medical Center continued functioning, but now it breathed differently. Tense. Watched. Ethan noticed first. One morning, the temporary badge that allowed him to circulate through the hospital didn't work. The reader beeped twice, then read. "System problem," said the security guard without looking in the eyes. No problem was random in that place. Carol was informed hours later, not by email, not by phone, by a dossier left on her desk. Photos of Ethan, of the old car, of the parking lot, of Riverton. A line underlined in red. Conflict of interest. She closed the file slowly, didn't tremble, didn't raise her voice. But something there died. It wasn't the romance. It was the last illusion that the system would allow humanity without retaliation. That night, Carol called everyone. Board, directors, auditors. The glass room on the top floor became too full for the silence that followed. "Before you speak," she began, "I'll clarify." She projected on the screen data nobody expected to see. Spreadsheets, contracts, old deviations. "This hospital was built on excellence," she continued, voice firm, "and maintained for years by selective convenience." Gazes averted. "You think the problem is an invisible man who slept in the parking lot?" she said. "But the real risk was always you." One of the counselors tried to interrupt. She raised her hand. "I'm not finished." Carol didn't defend Ethan, didn't ask permission to love him, didn't use him as a symbol. She did something more dangerous. She exposed the system. She announced a complete restructuring, independent audit, resignation of old positions. "And yes," she concluded, "I got involved with someone outside my circle." She breathed deeply. But the mistake was never him existing here. The mistake was this place teaching that only some deserve to exist. Absolute silence. The vote happened there. She lost the position, the presidency, the surname as Shield. But she didn't lose her posture. The next morning, Carol Seo-Jin was no longer CEO. Ethan waited outside the hospital beside Lila, ready to return to Riverton. She appeared without security guards, without driver, without badge, just her. "Is it over?" Ethan asked. She smiled, tired but whole. "What held me? Yes." Lila looked from one to the other, understood before they explained. "She's brave," she said quietly. Carol knelt in front of her. "You got better 'cause you fought, not because of me." Lila held her hand. "Then stay." They didn't return to Riverton that day, nor to Silver Heights. They went to a forgotten neighborhood in Aurora City, where small clinics struggled to survive. Carol didn't bring investors. She brought knowledge. Ethan didn't bring speeches. He brought presence. Together they opened a community medical foundation, without luxury, without plaques with names, but with open doors. Ethan started working there, not as a favor, but as a choice. Carol learned to lead without a throne. The romance didn't become a fairy tale. It became routine, early coffee, real discussions, silences that didn't frighten. They loved each other without hierarchy, without rescue, without possession, just recognition. Months later, a journalist asked Carol in a short interview, "Do you regret it?" She thought of Ethan organizing chairs in the waiting room, of Lila laughing in the hallway, of the hospital she left behind. "No," she replied. "For the first time, I know exactly who I am." The Haneul Grace Medical Center continued existing, but it was never the same again. And in Aurora City, a quiet story circulated, almost whispered, about a man who slept in the parking lot and never asked to be saved, and about a woman who lost everything to learn to protect without dominating. They didn't change the entire world, but they changed enough. And sometimes, that's the beginning of something bigger.